They say some buildings are haunted by shadows, but this one was haunted by something far worse. It wasn't the walls or the rooms, it was the elevator. Once you stepped inside, you could never be sure where it would take you, or if it would ever let you out again. I first heard about this place in an old Reddit thread. Apparently it was a local urban legend in St. Louis, Missouri. The year was 2010 and I was working on a story about haunted elevators for Reader's Digest, so I decided to visit. I found the building pretty easily. It was an old brick apartment complex with a wrought iron fence around it. I walked up to the door and pressed the button for the elevator. Then I waited. When the doors opened, I stepped inside. The elevator was dark and dank and smelled like mildew. I pressed the button for the top floor and then I started to climb. As the elevator rose, I could hear chains dragging metal moans. When the doors finally opened, I found myself in a room filled with trash and debris. It was then I realized that this place was truly haunted. The old building stood in silence. Its cracked windows reflected the pale glow of the streetlights. Once decades ago, it had been a proud office tower in the middle of the city, filled with the voices of workers, the smell of fresh coffee, and the endless ringing of telephones. But now it was nothing more than a forgotten skeleton of steel and concrete. Dust covered every corner, graffiti stained the walls, and the sound of rats scratching in the dark echoed like whispers of the dead. The locals avoided it. Children were warned not to play near it. Taxis refused to stop in front of it after sunset. Everyone had heard the same story. Something inside the building was cursed. They said people had gone missing here. They said strange lights could be seen flickering through the upper floors when the city slept. And always, the story returned to the same place, the elevator. It wasn't an ordinary elevator, old, metallic, and heavy. Its doors looked like the jaws of a beast waiting to snap shut. The panel of buttons was worn out, with numbers scratched away by time. Some buttons no longer lit up, yet somehow the elevator still moved, and that was the part nobody could explain. Janitors, trespassers, and thrill-seekers had all told the same tale. They stepped into the elevator, pressed for one floor. But the elevator had its own mind. It would move on its own, stopping at floors that didn't exist, opening its doors to hallways that were never part of the building's design. Some came back shaking, pale, unable to speak of what they had seen. Others never came back at all. On a rainy night when thunder rolled across the city, a young man named Daniel decided to test the legend for himself. He wasn't a believer in ghosts or curses. To him, the stories were just foolish tales meant to scare children. He carried a small flashlight, his phone, and a nervous smile as he stepped into the abandoned lobby. The smell of damp concrete and rust filled his nose, but his heart raced with excitement. There it stood, the elevator. Its metal doors were scratched. Its surface was cold and lifeless, but Daniel felt an odd pull toward it. He reached out and pressed the button. To his surprise, the light flickered on. The machinery groaned deep within the shaft, and with a screech like nails across a chalkboard, the doors slowly opened. A wave of cold air poured out from inside, colder than the rainy night outside. Daniel hesitated for just a second, then stepped forward. The doors closed behind him with a heavy thud, and in that moment he realized the stories, the legends, the fears, they were all real. The elevator shuddered. The lights above flickered and the sound of gears grinding filled the cabin. Daniel pressed for the third floor, but the elevator had other plans. The ride had begun. Below what? Below the ground floor? But how was this even possible? The elevator lurched again, coming to a stop. The word below remained on the panel, pulsing ominously. The doors slid open, revealing the same hallway from before. But now the shadows were gone, and the whispering had stopped. An unnatural stillness hung in the air. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped out of the elevator, his heart pounding against his ribs, closed the door, trapping the darkness inside, and leaned against the cool metal, listening intently. Silence. He was alone, or so he thought. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the distance. Footsteps. Someone or something was definitely in there. What was this place? And more importantly, where was he? He had entered the building through the front door. He remembered that clearly. There had been a security guard who had checked his ID. So why did the elevator take him below the ground floor? What was that word on the panel? Below seemed to mock him, daring him to go further. Curiosity and fear warred within him. He knew he should leave, yet something compelled him to stay. He walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The doors with their unreadable messages unnerved him. Were these some kind of trap? He didn't dare find out. Turning, he hurried back to the elevator. The doors were still closed, but when he pressed the button, nothing happened. The panel remained dark, offering no explanation, no apology. Panic tightened its grip on him. What if he was trapped here forever? He pounded on the doors, his own muffled screams echoing back at him. Then, as suddenly as it began, the elevator lurched into motion. The doors slid open, revealing not the ground floor, but another hallway, identical to the last, except for the flickering red numbers above the door. They read simply exit. With trembling hands, the elevator lurched to a stop. Daniel slid to the floor, gasping for breath. He looked up just in time to see the doors open on another identical hallway. Hope surged through him. Maybe this time he'd find a way out. Maybe this time he'd find someone who could help. But as he stepped into the hallway, he saw a group of children standing in front of him. Their faces pale and drawn, their eyes empty and black. And then they started to chant, their voices echoing eerily in the vast space. Go back, go back, go back. Daniel tried to call out, but his voice caught in his throat. He couldn't speak. He turned to flee, but the elevator doors had vanished. Behind him, the children began to advance, their chanting growing louder, more insistent. Go back, go back, go back. Panic seized him. He ran, stumbling blindly through the endless maze of hallways. The children's chanting echoing behind him, urging him to go back, go back, go back. He could feel their presence at his back, their cold, clammy hands brushing against his neck, their whispers scratching at his ears. Go back, go back. Exhausted, he collapsed against a wall, sliding to the floor. The chanting stopped. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was his ragged breathing. The scrape of a chair on the floor, a door opening somewhere in the distance. Footsteps. Daniel's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. But there was none. He was trapped. The doors to the hallway slid open, revealing the endless corridor. And standing in the doorway was the tall, thin man from before, his face still turned at an unnatural angle, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Daniel wanted to scream, to claw at the man, but he couldn't. He was frozen, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The man beckoned with a finger. Come, he said, his voice a raspy whisper. It's time to go back. Daniel wanted to resist, but his feet moved of their own accord, pulling him toward the elevator. He stumbled inside as the door slid shut, plunging him into darkness. He could hear the children's voices now, their glee echoing in his ears. He's back, he's back, he's back. The elevator began its agonizingly slow ascent, and Daniel slumped against the wall, closing his eyes. He didn't want to see where this nightmare would end. Didn't want to know what other horrors awaited him in the building's twisted bowels. He just wanted it all to be over. But as the elevator climbed, he could feel the darkness pressing against him, enveloping him, promising oblivion. And in that moment, he knew he didn't want to escape the darkness. He wanted to become it. There's nothing down there, Daniel. There's no bottom. Daniel's eyes snapped open, his heart hammering against his ribs. The elevator was still silent, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He blinked, trying to clear the sweat from his eyes, trying to make sense of the last few minutes. Had he actually been falling? Was that really a demon he'd seen, or was he just losing his mind? Then he saw the blood. At first, he thought it was a stain, some dark mark left by something or someone else. But when he reached out to touch it, his fingers sank into wet, warm flesh. Daniel screamed, stumbling back as the skin tore and split under his touch. And then it moved. A gnarled, clawed hand shot out, grabbing for his face. Daniel yelped, thrashing wildly as another hand shot out, its long fingers wrapping around his ankle and dragging him down into the darkness. Something hard and cold pressed against his neck, and a raspy voice hissed right by his ear. You can't escape now, Daniel. You're mine. Daniel thrashed, kicking and clawing, trying to break free, but he wasn't fighting flesh and blood. He was fighting the abyss, and the abyss was strong. He felt himself being pulled under, dragged down into an endless black pit. And then he hit bottom first into something soft and yielding. He cried out, scrambling to get away, but it was too late. Whatever this place was, it was closing in around him, squeezing the air from his lungs, crushing him, tearing at his skin. Daniel clawed at the darkness, his fingernails scraping against something slick and rubbery. Through the thin material, he could feel the heat, the stench of sulfur and decay. And then he heard the voice again, closer now, right in his ear. "I've waited so long for you, Daniel. We're finally together." A single tear rolled down Daniel's cheek, hitting the rubbery material and sizzling as if hot acid. He screamed a primal, desperate sound that echoed in the vast emptiness. But no one came to save him. No one could save him. This was his hell, and he was meant to suffer here forever. Whatever was holding him let go. Daniel hit the ground hard, the air knocked from his lungs. He lay there gasping, his body trembling uncontrollably. As his vision swam back into focus, he realized he was still in the elevator, or what was left of it. The walls were crumbling, the ceiling leaking something black and tar-like. And in the corner, something writhed. Daniel stared in horror as the thing slowly took shape, coiling and uncoiling, stretching and contracting. It was a gigantic snake, its scales the color of fresh blood, its eyes burning embers in the darkness. As it slithered closer, Daniel could see more of them, countless eyes staring at him with cold, ancient malice. "Get away," he whispered, his voice hoarse. The snake reared its head, bearing rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth, each one dripping venom. And then it struck, its massive body coiling around the elevator car, crushing it, crushing him. Daniel screamed as the snake's jaws opened wide, ready to swallow him whole, but it wasn't the end, not really, because as the snake lunged, he saw something glinting in its eyes, a flicker of recognition, a spark of familiarity, and in that instant he knew. It wasn't a monster. It was a memory. It was his sin, his shame, his deepest fear made flesh. And as it devoured him, he understood. This wasn't hell. It was just the beginning. The elevator groaned as it came to another stop. This time Daniel didn't rush forward. He was shaking, his shirt soaked with sweat, his eyes darting toward the doors as they slid open. What he saw chilled him more than anything so far. It was an office floor, but frozen in time. Dust-coated desks, toppled chairs, scattered papers. Old typewriters sat broken, their keys rusted shut. The fluorescent lights above flickered weakly, buzzing like trapped flies. Daniel stepped out carefully, his shoes crunching over shattered glass. On the far wall, he noticed a corkboard covered with yellowed newspaper clippings. He walked closer, wiping the dust away, and read the headlines. 13 dead in elevator. Plunge. Downtown office tower tragedy, elevator malfunction, claims dozens, building closed. After fatal accident, Daniel S. hands trembled as he pulled one of the articles free. It was dated nearly 40 years ago. The report described a horrific accident in the very building he stood in. An elevator had plummeted from the top floor to the bottom, killing everyone inside instantly. Witnesses claimed to have heard screams echoing long after the crash. The more he read, the worse it became. Testimonies from survivors mentioned seeing shadows moving in the shaft at night, voices whispering in the stairwells. Some claimed the elevator wasn't broken at all, that it was possessed. As Daniel flipped through the papers, his flashlight beam fell upon a photograph. It showed the victims of the crash. Men and women in suits, smiling for the camera before tragedy struck. He felt his stomach drop. Among them was the same little girl he had just seen on the strange floor. The same dress, the same empty eyes. His breath caught in his throat. The clippings weren't just history, they were warnings. The air grew colder. Behind him, a faint groan echoed down the hallway. Daniel spun around and saw one of the office chairs slowly sliding across the floor by itself. The typewriters began clacking, their keys hammering out nonsense words, but all in unison, as if chanting. Then the elevator behind him dinged. The doors had opened again. Daniel dropped the article and ran back inside, his chest heaving. The panel lit up, but this time, it wasn't random numbers or words. It showed faces. Blurred, twisted faces pressed against the screen, screaming silently. He recognized one of them, the little girl. Another was the man in the hotel uniform. He stumbled back, horrified. The elevator trembled, its lights flashing red. A voice, faint and distorted, filled the cabin, whispering right into his ear. "We never left." Daniel realized the truth. The elevator wasn't cursed by chance. It was a prison, built to hold the spirits of those who had died in the crash. And every person who entered became part of it. The floor beneath him shook violently as the elevator dropped again. Faster, deeper, dragging him closer to the same fate. What the hell? Why does this dumb elevator keep going up and down? Daniel pressed the button for the ground floor, but instead of the familiar hum of slowing cables, the elevator lurched upward, nearly knocking Daniel off his feet. He gripped the railing so hard his fingers ached. Sweat poured down his face. Above him, the fluorescent lights flickered red, then black, then red again. Each flash showing distorted shadows pressed against the walls. Shadows that weren't his own. Then the door slid open. And what Daniel saw made him scream, "Stop!" The elevator continued its relentless climb. He slammed the buttons, punched the emergency stop, but nothing happened. Sparks burst from the panel, but the elevator didn't slow. Instead, it laughed. Not mechanically, but with 100 broken voices echoing through the cabin. The doors slid open again, and this time, Daniel saw a glimpse of something truly horrifying. A hospital ward lined with empty beds, each one stained with what looked like dried blood. As he watched, one of the beds rose and a skeletal hand emerged from the blanket, clawing at the air before disappearing back under the covers. Daniel shuddered, scrambling away from the doors. But there was nowhere left to go. The elevator laughed again, and the doors slid open yet again, this time revealing a school hallway. Lockers banged open and shut as if someone was frantically searching for something. Daniel felt a cold hand on his shoulder, and he whirled around, but there was no one there. The hand was gone. He turned back to the doors just in time to see a bloodied meat cleaver drop from one of the lockers, clattering to the floor. The next level was a subway platform where twisted, faceless figures stood motionless, waiting for a train that would never come. They stared at him with vacant eyes. Their mouths moved in silent screams. Daniel wanted to help them, but he couldn't. He was frozen in place, staring into their soulless depths. Then, as suddenly as it started, it ended. The elevator jerked violently and finally stopped. The doors opened onto a pitch-black corridor, darker than anything he had ever seen. From that darkness, a hand reached in, pale, long-fingered, impossibly thin. It grabbed the edge of the door and tried to pull itself inside. Daniel panicked. He kicked the hand with all his strength, slamming the door shut. But the elevator groaned as the metal twisted like it was alive. Suddenly, the ceiling above cracked open and black, oily liquid began dripping down onto his shoulders. He screamed, wiping it from his skin, but it spread like tar, sticking to him, burning cold. Daniel fell to his knees, his heart pounding in his chest. He tore his backpack open, pulling out his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, and for a moment the shadows recoiled. He shone it on the walls, on the dripping ceiling. The whispers grew louder, but the shadows stayed back. He realized the light was his only weapon. With shaking hands, he aimed it at the panel. The screen flickered, showing once again the word "below." He pressed the ground floor button one last time, screaming at the top of his lungs. The light from the flashlight flared, brighter than ever, as if responding to his desperation. The elevator screamed. The walls shook violently, the voices shrieking in agony. Daniel fell to his knees, covering his ears as the sound pierced his skull. Then, just as suddenly, silence. The elevator dinged softly. The doors opened. Daniel gasped. He was back in the lobby. The same cracked tiles, the same broken lights, the same smell of damp concrete. The entrance door stood just ahead, wide open, showing the stormy night outside. Daniel stumbled out of the elevator and into the lobby. He was soaked, shivering, but relief washed over him. He'd made it. He'd escaped the nightmare he'd found himself trapped in. The heavy oak doors were just a few steps away. He could almost taste the freedom on the other side. Then he saw her, a little girl standing by the doors, her back to him. She was wearing a white nightgown, and her long, wet hair hid her face. But then she turned. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Her smile was wide, stretching unnaturally across her pale face. Her eyes, dark and soulless, stared right at him. And behind her, the figures that had been with him in the elevator pressed against the walls, their faces distorted, reaching out as if wanting to grab him. "No," Daniel whispered, shaking his head. He turned back toward the lobby doors. Freedom was right there. Just a few more steps. He could escape. He could survive. But when he ran, the sound of his footsteps didn't match. For every step he took forward, he heard one behind him. Quick, heavy, following. He glanced over his shoulder. The little girl was no longer inside the elevator. She was in the lobby now. Her small bare feet left wet, dark prints across the tiles as she walked toward him. The storm outside roared louder, lightning flashing. But the exit seemed farther away than before, like the building was stretching, twisting, refusing to let him leave. Daniel sprinted, his lungs burning, but no matter how fast he ran, the doors never got closer. The girl's laughter echoed around him, high-pitched, almost like glass breaking. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The ground beneath him trembled. Slowly, he raised his head and realized with horror he was no longer in the lobby. The exit doors had vanished. The walls had changed. He was back inside the elevator. The cabin sealed shut with a metallic thud.